but when you look at the law more closely, like your story, Greg, of the origin, the history of the Insurrection Act and Posse Comitatus is really quite, revealing. You have laws that were, basically enacted at the time and enforced to protect slavery, basically. Both the Insurrection Act and Posse Comitatus. Posse Comitatus was imposed to try to help the Confederates in their reconstruction of the South segregation, of Jim Crow segregation in the South. But in general, it has been invoked as a precautionary measure to prevent the troops from being deployed for domestic law enforcement. However, after that immunity decision last year, that counter-constitutional, unprecedented edict from John Roberts of the Supreme Court, you have a law that now, when you read it, you sort of just can't believe what it says. So I was going to read it because there are very few statutes that are this short. Posse Comitatus Act says, whoever, except in cases and under circumstances expressly authorized by the Constitution or Act of Congress, willfully uses any part of the Army or Air Force as a posse comitatus or otherwise to execute the laws shall be fined under this title or imprisoned for not more than 2 years or both. So let's just think about it. There's another part that talks about the payment of the troops, that they can't be paid if they're engaged in this activity. But now we have a Supreme Court that has said, who can't be fined or imprisoned under criminal law? Donald J. Trump. So you have a law that's supposed to constrain a president or anyone from ordering the troops to be engaged in law enforcement. And the penalty is that you will be guilty of a crime, which this court has said Trump cannot commit when engaged in his official acts. So that's a problem. And then in theory, the troops that pursue these orders that are, in my view, unlawful as a moral matter, but not unlawful as in illegal or criminal under John Roberts' abominable ruling with his fellow Republican appointees in that immunity disaster. But the troops are being paid sort of anyway. And meanwhile, Trump has asserted that he can sort of pay anyone he wants and not pay anyone he wants, fire anyone he wants, or keep who he wants. So we're in this real lawlessness. And then you have the overlay of the Insurrection Act, which, as you note, Greg, was passed, more than 200 years ago, and which, in its first instance, has a heavy constraint on the president to not, send the guard in or the troops in unless there's an insurrection. In essence, if the governor invites the president. But then there are two other provisions that don't require necessarily that the governor invite the president, but that say that if this condition exists, if there's an insurrection. And that goes back to the beginning point, which is this is not an insurrection. This is a routine act of dissent. This is the type of conduct that is, fully consistent with the First Amendment, with our freedom of speech in this country. It's not an insurrection. And you know what? We know exactly what an insurrection is. We saw it on January 6th. And Trump, the leader of the insurrectionists, has pardoned those people. So it is just horrifying